Hey, it's Sammy for another episode of the I Do Music podcast, and our goal and our mission is to empower and educate musicians and artists worldwide. And on today's episode, we sat down with founder of the 411 brand, John Thomas, discussing the start of the 411 brand as a youth development organization, how working at a community center in New York helped him learn the business, and how his connections with celebrities early on in radio helped with the start of 411. Hey, it's Sammy Approved for another episode of the I Do Music podcast, and I'm sitting down with founder of the 411 Brand Foundation, an amazing youth development program that you have been working on for 25 plus years.
Yes,
How are you?
Wonderful. How are you?
Great. John Thomas.
Yes.
So, John, you are from Buffalo, New York originally.
Correct.
Yes. And you actually brought your talents to the South for college.
Yes.
Yes. I'm curious as to, well, first tell us what the 411, for people who aren't familiar, like I said, it's been here for many years, but tell us what the 411 brand is today, and then we'll get to how it got there.
Okay. Well, in a nutshell, 411 is a youth development organization that is designed to bridge the gap between successful people and young people that want to be successful
Right.
in the entertainment, athletic, and education space.
Yes. Now, tell me about, because, I mean, you said the entertainment, athletic, and
Entertainment.
Space. How did you get to that point? Because I know you played basketball, correct? So that's where the athletic part comes from, I'm
Correct.
assuming.
Yes.
And this is just your foundation. I'm sure you have people working with you now, but you started this, like, from the beginning. You didn't have, like, a partner initially.
Nope. Solo.
So we have to go through some of the journey. So being originally from Buffalo and then transitioning to Alabama for school, what type of transition? Because I know you went to school for a full ride basketball scholarship, correct?
Correct.
So that is, I'm sure, what urged you to do it. But that transition, were you excited to come down south? Were you, how did you feel? Because New York and Alabama are vastly different.
Yeah, I was excited, but I also was a little like a fish out of water. My father grew up in Alabama, but I really didn't go down as much. So in my mind, I thought everyone had a farm. There was not a lot of buildings. The typical stereotype of what Alabama was. When I got down there, it wasn't like that. There were streets and, so that made it.
It was a city.
It was a city. So I just didn't have any idea of what it was. But it was a great balance of the fast pace of New York to Alabama. It kind of slowed down, and I was almost feeling like a fish in a fishbowl because I spoke different.
Right.
And just the vibe was a little bit different from everyone that was there. So, but it was a good transition.
They probably loved you, though.
Yeah, it just finds people staring at you,
Because they knew you were different. It was similar for me coming from the South and going to D.C. for school. It was faster. I mean, I grew up in Atlanta, so it's still a city, but then going to D.C. for school was like such a difference. Like, people were not as polite.
Correct.
And then just experiencing New York for myself, very different. So attending school for you, were you initially trying to play pro for, professional basketball, like NBA? Is that the goal?
Well, in hindsight, looking back, my goal was to have an opportunity to play in the NBA. It was, if I made the NBA, I will use the money to do this. But because basketball came naturally and I was very good at it, it was just a path that I just stayed on and just tried to see where it was taking me.
So you've always had the vision to do something like this, to create a foundation like this. This was something that, when did you decide that this was something you wanted to do?
I didn't know what it was. I just knew I wanted to do something that incorporated everything that I love. And just going through life, you kind of find what those things are.
Right.
But I knew just playing professional basketball wasn't the end all.
Right.
I just knew it was a gift that I had, and as a kid, I can make money that way, and then which would allow me to do the things that I love to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when did you decide, or when did you figure out that it was no longer going to happen for you in terms of the NBA?
I was invited to the NBA Summer League in Los Angeles, and there's hundreds of people there trying to get a job, and I quickly realized at the end of that camp I wasn't invited to go to another team. So I could become a free agent and go try out, or I can go overseas. And then I realized I didn't have the passion that it took because I saw all these guys hungry, trying to make it in livelihood. They already had children, families, and I just didn't have that
Yeah.
passion at 22 years old. So, and it's funny that the last day of the camp, I went back to my room, cut on the television, and there was a youth program on. It was like a older guy talking to kids. And I'm looking at it like, that's a good idea, but that's kind of whack the way it's being done.
Right.
And 411 began that day.
Oh, wow.
So I got back on the plane, went back to New York, told my parents, this is what I'm going to do. And they just supported it.
That's awesome that you had supportive parents.
Yeah, they've been super supportive a lot. You know, they've always just given me, if this is what I want to do. When I was maybe 11, I told my parents, I'm getting a scholarship. You don't have to worry about paying for school. Because I found that if you play basketball well, you can get a scholarship.
Right.
So no one's in my family ever had a scholarship or anything like that. So they're looking at me like, okay, well, go ahead and do that. And I can tell they didn't believe, but they allowed.
Right.
And then they started to see that, man, he's pretty good. Then I'm on television. Then these scholarship offers come in. So they just kind of supported and believed.
Right, from there.
And just kind of gave me that space.
You seem like you were always a very passionate, but also headstrong in terms of your goals.
Yeah.
Since obviously 11 years old, like I'm going to get a scholarship. You were manifesting these things over your life early.
Yeah, I was, and it's funny, I have children now, and they're not as focused as I was or am.
Why do you think that is?
I have no idea, to be honest with you, because a lot of people that I spoke to, they weren't as focused as I was. Like I didn't go out while everyone was going out to party. I'll have someone open the gym at the Boys and Girls Club and work on my game. I just felt that if I achieved these goals, all these things that everyone wants to do will be there at that point.
Right.
So I just never wasted time. I'm not that type of person. And it's difficult being around people
who aren't.
Same. Exactly.
Understood. You're a unicorn in that respect. Okay, so I'm curious as to your journey beyond Alabama, beyond going home to New York to tell your parents. Then you took your talents to Atlanta.
Yeah.
Why Atlanta?
Well, my cousin Carol Blackman, who was a radio personality at V103.
Yeah. That's where I started too. I know you started there. We'll get there, but that's where well, not really where I started, but here in Atlanta for radio. Yeah.
Okay. So I called her and told her I had this idea for this show. And the show was 411 Knowledge and Entertainment Show.
Right.
We'll invite celebrities on to tell their story in an Oprah type setting. It's just designed for young people. And she thought that was a good idea. She said, well, I think it'll work here. Come on down. So that gave me confidence, like, man, Atlanta's, and this is before Outkast. So there was like Damian Dame, like those were the music artists.
Right. It wasn't that.
No.
Yeah.
Usher wasn't here. TLC wasn't here yet. But they were right around the corner. So when I came down and told her this is what I wanted to do, and I tried to take meetings, and, you know, mind you, I'm maybe 22, 23 years old. So dressing up to me was like a button-down Timbs and jeans.
Not Timbs. You had the Timbs on.
Yeah, so I'm taking these meetings, saying this is what I want to do, and it's a great idea. And they're looking at me like, I like the idea. Who's going to pay for it?
Right.
And I'm like, well, you're going to pay for it. And they were like, why would we pay for that?
Right.
And so everything that they came to me with, I had to answer. And me being how I was going to answer that question, which allowed me to take stair steps to actually achieve the actual goal. So Carol gave me that support.
Yeah.
And then going through maybe 4 or 5 months of just frustration, I went and had a lunch meeting with her. And just, this is what's happening. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to go home, blah, blah, blah. So she says, well, come to the radio station and we'll go out to lunch. As I'm at the station, she's taking me to the different departments. So there's promotions. A guy named Joe Libios, they were doing a celebrity basketball game. It was coming up in 2 weeks. No one knew anything about basketball in the room.
Right.
So they're like, well, we can have performances during timeouts and we can do this and do that. And so when Carol, and this is literally as I walk in the room, Carol says, "This is my cousin John. Da da da. He's here. Um, I know you guys are working on something," and he played basketball. So Joe turned around to me. He said, "You played?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we're doing this game. What do you think?" And they're telling him like, I don't think people want to see a basketball game.
Right.
I get the celebrity part of it, but people want to see an actual game. So maybe if you do this, you do that, it'll work. And he said, "Well, what are you doing for the next 2 weeks?" And I said, "Nothing really." And he said, "Well, I need you to intern and just help us with this game." Did the game. Brian McKnight was one of the artists. Jamie Foxx. All these guys. So I literally went from wanting to go home to now standing next to these celebrities. And I'm telling them what to do pretty much.
Right.
Again, super young.
Right.
The game went off great. Joe asked me, "Do you want a job?" He offered me a part-time job in promotions. And that's kind of where my radio stint began.
Yeah, usually that's where it starts, promotions.
Promotions, yeah. Which is good, though, because you get to learn the lay of the land. Everyone needs you.
Exactly.
But you're doing a lot of the grunt work.
Exactly.
And
it's important to start there. It's the
super
foundation.
important, yeah.
I'm sure you met a lot of people. You talked to a lot of people. You built those connections early on.
Correct.
So all the while you are working in promotions, you're still thinking about 411.
Yes.
The 411 brand.
Yes.
Yes. So why did you think it was important? Because did you end up doing the show for the entertainment show for 411? Like, is that how it started?
Yes. So it started. So Carol came to me. So now I'm working at V103
Yes.
in promotions. Carol comes to me and says, "John, we need prizes. I'm going to speak to some students at a school and I need prizes."
Right.
So, and I said, "Well, what exactly are you doing?" She said, "Like a career day. Just talk about who I am, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Carol, what'd be cool is if we did 411, the idea I was telling you about. You can host it. We'll call a guest and you can talk to them in front of this audience and blah, blah, blah." She was like, "Okay, here's the number to the school. Set it up."
Right.
So now I'm excited. Call the school. They were excited. And I actually create like a TV show in their library. We had 2 cameras, a set, all the kids, and we actually did the show. DJ Jelly was our DJ.
Yeah, Jelly.
Back then. So we actually did the show, and it turned out great. And the school asked, "Can you come back?"
Nice.
And so now I felt, okay, I got my footing together. This is actually what it is that I want to do, and I have an opportunity.
Where were you putting the footage?
I still have all the footage it's on VHS tapes that they're making digital now. So we share them every now and again.
But at the time, were you sharing them somewhere? Like
no, because
you just had those conversations.
We just did them and kept them because I wanted to go on television, but I'm so picky that it didn't look like Oprah's show.
Right.
So I just refused to show it. In hindsight, I wish I would have just did it because it's not so much aesthetically what it looks like. It's the content of it. But back then, it just didn't look right. So I just wouldn't share it. So I just sat on all that stuff.
Let's get into that piece right there, what you said, because I create content myself and I struggle with, putting certain things out. But then on the other end, sometimes I just do it and my friends are like, wow, like, admire that in a sense. But for me, it's like, dang, I look back on it like, this is not good. So what would you suggest to someone who's like creating content or interested in producing their own show, but they don't necessarily have the resources or the more so like the finances to fund it the way that they envision it? But, what do you suggest for that idea of conception? Do you think that they should hold off until they have the resources? Do you think, just from your experiences to date?
Well, for me, it was just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just find a way to do it because now all those shows have so much value.
Right.
Now I got a call the other day from Netflix. They're doing a Biggie documentary.
Oh, nice.
And they went on YouTube and saw the interview and they asked to license it for the documentary.
Carol did an interview with Biggie for
Ryan Cameron.
Ryan did an interview. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I did see that.
Yeah. So,
Nice.
Yeah, so Ryan hosted it.
So you had like different hosts for this particular platform.
Yeah, so it started with Carol.
Right.
Just because of the relationship.
Right.
We did a show at Outkast.
Nice.
And Carol's interviewing them, and I'm looking at like, Carol's like their aunt. Like she doesn't know what they're talking about. And
Right.
Pimp this and this and that. And they had, you could see she was out
Out of touch.
yeah. And so I sat down with Ryan and said, Ryan, I want to split the host. Would you do the entertainment side and Carol do the knowledge portion of the actual show? And they agreed. So that's how Ryan Cameron jumped on.
Nice.
And then it grew. Chaka Zulu hosted. Big Les hosted it. So
Nice.
we just kind of moved.
And these were all taking place in schools.
Well, it started in the schools. Started Woodland Elementary and East Point. Started there. Other schools started hearing it. So it turned into a tour.
Right.
So we toured the school system.
Wow.
Then we started getting all these great guests because I'm at the radio station and there was no shows like what we were doing.
Right.
And those artists wanted to be in front of their actual audience.
Right.
So that's what make our show so appealing.
It was a demand for it.
It was a demand.
Right.
So
and it was beneficial to the artist. I think a lot of times when people create content, it's just like the artist is helping their platform,
right.
Not the other way around.
And back then there was no social media.
Right.
So artists back then were looking for any outlet to get out there because there wasn't a lot.
Right.
So now a lot of celebrities would take the stance that they're helping you.
Right.
Because of the brand.
So many options.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's dope. I think that's amazing. How were you able, because eventually you were able to secure partners from Sprite, Magic Johnson Theaters that just opened. How are you able to secure those partners in terms of, if somebody's listening to this now and they're like, I'm at a point where I need more and I don't know how to have those conversations. Obviously, you would develop relationships with people, but I'm just curious as to the partnership space.
Well,
how did you get into that?
I'll tell you two stories. Well, with Magic Johnson Theaters, we're touring the school system, and we couldn't talk about HIV and AIDS in the schools or suicide or any of these.
Why?
They just wouldn't allow it. You couldn't talk about God. You couldn't talk about any of these, anything that could be controversial inside schools. And so that seemed like it pigeonholed me.
Right.
So Magic Johnson brought his theaters down, and I was like, it'd be dope if we went to the theater and held the show inside one of the theaters. And then we can invite schools to the actual theater to create an experience. And then we can talk about what we want to talk about.
Right.
So it's almost like turning Magic Johnson Theaters into our own studio.
Yeah.
Before the movie. So we used to do them in the morning before the movies started. So kids would come, the place would be open. It was just great.
So how do people find out about it? Through the schools?
Through the school. So we still work with the school system. So now we will call 2 schools at a time. And then they can bus kids over. It'll be like a field trip.
Dope.
And then we'll have these celebrities and, it was just...
So you just couldn't talk about it in the school?
In the school, right.
Interesting. Because
we couldn't, it was just, if one kid felt, or a parent felt...
Right. Understood.
So we just kind of had to stay away from that space, but I didn't want to be limited.
Right.
So
the conversation.
So I had to pivot and found. So that's how Magic Johnson worked. And so we started doing the shows in there, and then that went on like a 3-year run where all these kids kept coming, and it just was a great experience. With Sprite. And this is a little different. Back then, again, no internet.
Right.
Through frustration, I grabbed the phone book. Going through the phone book. Coca-Cola found the number, called and said, hey, I have this idea. I want Coke to be a part of it. It's based in Atlanta. This is what we do. She said, well, that sounds like something Sprite would be involved in, but there's a process to that. I'll just send you up there.
Right.
I'll transfer you up there. Lady answers the phone. I call her. I tell her what it is. We happen to go to the same church. So she was like, that is great. A brand manager who I work with, I'll put this specifically on his desk because I think this is something Sprite should get along. Again, this is a blind call off of a phone book.
Right.
So 2 days later, the brand manager calls me back, sets up a meeting. I go in there, tell him everything that I want to do. A 10-city tour because we just come off this Magic Johnson thing.
Right.
We want to go to 10 different cities. We get 10 theaters. This is what we do, blah, blah, blah. He says, how much? And I said, and again, I don't know about budgets or any of that stuff. I'm like, like 30,000. I think that would be great. So he said, okay, give me to the end of the day. He calls me an hour later. All right, you can pick up the check tomorrow and we'll work out the details.
Wow.
All off of a cold call.
That's crazy.
And within a week, I had 30,000, more than what I was getting paid at V103.
Right.
So now I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I made it now.
Right.
This is just the beginning.
Right.
And so that's kind of how, everything kind of.
So at that point, were you thinking like in terms of the business, now you have like $30,000 for this idea,
Right.
Now what do you do?
Right.
Do you like establish it as a nonprofit? What were you thinking?
Business wise wasn't, because I wasn't a business person, so I
Right.
didn't think of that way. I
Right.
just thought I have this amount of money I have to be accountable for, and this is what I said I was going to do
In
with it.
hindsight, what do you think would have been the next move?
So what I wish I would have did was sat down, and I had an attorney at the time. I would have sat down with him and thought more than just the moment.
Right.
If I would have thought 5 years from now, because again, he would have told me this money doesn't last.
Right.
You would just spend through that money. How are you making the money back? Because I'm not charging kids to come to it. I'm not bringing in money, but I'm putting out money.
Exactly.
In my mind, I come from an athletic background where if you do the work, college coaches, people will come see you and then they'll give you a deal. Business doesn't work like that.
Right.
You can spend all that money if you want to, and if you don't plan, you won't have it anymore. So in hindsight, I definitely would have looked further and thought, how do I multiply this? How do I expand?
Continue to grow.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So even when you began to like pitch this idea, first, how did the tour go? Like you did 10 cities.
It did well. Chaka Zulu was a host.
Yeah.
And so, and Chaka, this was before Disturbing the Peace.
Right.
He was still at Hot 107.9 or what, 97.5, whatever
Yeah, at
one
the
it
time.
is. He was still there. So he would fly to the cities and it was great. We went to DC. What's it called? Union? It's
Union Ave.
It's like a mall, not a mall, like Union Station.
Union Station, yeah.
So it was a theater inside Union Station. We did it inside there.
Nice.
We went to Philly, went to LA.
Nice.
So it was great. But at the end of it, it was like, now what?
Right.
So it was almost like I was back at square one.
Right.
With a lot of content. And it wasn't quality to go on television to actually make money. So it was almost like I was back at square one again.
Right.
So
from there, I know you intended on like pitching this positive programming to networks. How did you face and I guess overcome those challenges or struggles of sharing your vision of like how impactful this idea is to networks during the time of like negative programming? Because at the time I know I read something where it was this, and I remember this was a time of Jerry Springer, Ricky Lake, all those like little talk shows that were promoting violence and scandal.
Correct.
Which is, I mean, similar to what we see today, but just like even more.
Yes.
Yeah, crazy. But there is still opportunity for positive programming. And especially at the time that you were pitching, you knew that this could impact views and it could do what it should do.
Yes.
So, but I'm curious as to why you think you faced those challenges with networks, and how you were able to try to at least convey your vision to them.
Well, I knew there was a space because we were actually doing it.
Right.
So there was hundreds of kids that we invite to the theaters that were watching it, and their feedback or reaction was always great.
Right.
So I kind of took that energy and sat in front of these production houses and said, this is what we do. We want to put it on television. And they were saying, no kids are going to watch that. And in my mind, I'm like, why? They would watch it. This is what we're actually doing it. So I quickly realized that television business is the copycat business. So if this is working over here, these other networks are just going to duplicate that. That's why so many judge shows or these talk shows is because one is working. They'll just find a different host, different set, and do the same exact thing. So I quickly realized that doing something good and business don't always align.
Right.
And business is about the dollar. So if this is working, I don't care if it's hurting a whole generation. This is what we're going to do because it makes money. And I think you see that with a lot of these reality shows that they keep force feeding. And now in dealing with young people every day, they aspire
to be a reality star.
They think Love and Hip Hop and Basketball Wives are goals.
Right.
And as a kid, I can see why you would think
Wow,
that.
that's fascinating.
Yeah,
Right.
I get it, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
dead end,
Mm-hmm.
and there has to be a conversation about the dead end
Right.
so that these kids on the front side can make better choices and decisions.
Yeah, because I hear a lot of when I go speak to kids in schools, I ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up, of course, or if it's a career day, that's obviously what we're talking about.
Hmm.
And they'll say things like a YouTube or a reality star, and I
Right,
think that's so interesting. I mean, because you certainly can
right,
make a career out of it,
right.
but it's just interesting that a lot of kids are like, I want to be a YouTube star.
Because it's something that they enjoy and they something that someone is doing that looks like them.
Right.
So, and I don't have to do social studies to do that. I don't have to go to school, so they easily pick that. Just like when we were younger, we wanted to be professional athletes. It's because we were good at something, you can make money at it, and everybody loved that person. So we wanted to aspire to be that.
Yeah, I wanted to actually talk. You said something about these are people that look like them.
Hmm.
I'm curious as to, because I know we will get there, but you worked with the Boys and Girls Club, Full Circle Moment, having your own program in the Boys and Girls Club of which you worked at.
Exactly.
So full circle there. We'll discuss that as well. But why is it important for kids in our neighborhoods to see people who look like them in their spaces doing things like this? Like, seeing that I'm not a YouTube star, but I do this, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like there's another space for it.
Hmm.
You're you're not the athlete, but you're able to bring athletes and celebrities into this space. And you have your own nonprofit and you have your own organization. Why is it important for them to see you doing that versus, seeing the same Black people doing reality and being athletes and, just giving them a variety of something?
But I think um, we have so much to offer.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, there's a filter on what's shown to the world of what we can offer.
Right.
So this is our way of kind of collectively showing there is a job that you might be good at
Right.
that doesn't um
Require you to sell your soul.
exactly. And unfortunately they don't know the selling of the soul part
Right.
because they look at it as attention
Mhm.
and money.
Mhm.
If I can get attention and money, that's what I want to do.
Right.
So unfortunately, we have to start showing kids to look inward and figure out
Mhm.
who you are first,
Mhm.
and then go find your place in the world instead
Absolutely.
of looking in the world to try to find a place.
So your community efforts can't go unnoticed. Obviously, your whole entire organization is to better the or foundation is to better the community.
Hmm.
How did you begin working towards those efforts back home? Because obviously you spent a lot of time here in Atlanta,
Hmm.
but I know that at some point you were able to do something for Buffalo, New York specifically.
Yeah, there was a moment when I went back and I was just visiting, and my sister was working with Buffalo State
Hmm.
College and working with youth.
Gotcha.
And they had a basketball instructor who quit right before programming began.
Oh wow.
And so she called me and was like, John, they need you. They don't have a basketball instructor. I was like, Elena, I'm only here for a week. She said, well, it's for 2 weeks. You can do it. Da 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 da. And I said, okay, well, I'll do it, and then I'll stay longer if it works.
Mm-hmm.
It changed my whole perception because I realized I was disconnected from the city that I was in because when I graduated, I left and
Right.
I didn't come back.
Right.
I'll just go visit my parents and then I'll leave.
Right.
So that next generation, they knew who I was just from everyone talking and, seeing all the basketballs and all of
Mhm.
that. But I didn't have a relationship with them.
Mhm.
So teaching them basketball gave me that connection with the young people again. And so that went so well that I thought I need to come back more and do more of this.
Right.
And then realized a lot of my peers need to come back. So I just created a 411 All Star Weekend where we had like a picnic, a celebrity basketball
Nice.
game. We did a show with Nas. I did
Oh
the
wow.
talk show. So we did that up there.
Wow.
Nas was a guest.
That's amazing.
So we just had a great weekend. And
So did you know like okay, obviously you met a lot of these celebrities or like know these people from radio, but
mhm.
like how did you connect with Nas? Did you already have that through someone else
I
or
had a friend that worked with Columbia Records
okay.
at that time. and he knew what I was doing in Atlanta. And so him and who was on tour? He was on tour with Usher,
Mm.
and they were just so happened to be in Buffalo that weekend.
Wow.
And so I was like, yo, I'm doing this. It would be great. Big Les is hosting it. Can we get him? And he was like, yeah, just let me work out the details.
That's amazing.
And he did it. And everyone, even the radio station up there, was like, Nas never shows up for anything. He's not going to show up.
Right.
And they wouldn't promote it on the radio because they felt he didn't show up for something for them. So they thought he wouldn't show up.
Right.
So they didn't promote it or anything like that. And he showed up and it turned out great. And so they turned back and apologized.
Right.
And how can we work, in the future together?
Yeah.
But again, I was just from there and I was only visiting once every year.
Right.
But we turned this into a 10-year run. Every year we went up there. It was a 411 weekend.
That's
People would
amazing.
fly in. We had parties and,
Just a whole weekend of
it was great.
That's dope.
Yeah.
I love that. So then you actually ended up accepting a position in New York, yes?
Yes.
For director of programming.
Yes.
Or programs at Carver Community Center. Why'd you decide to transition back? I mean, obviously what you were doing made sense, but being the program, what does that even mean? Like you're a program director or director of programs?
Over all programs.
Yes.
That I'm in between all the kids and I guess the executives.
Gotcha.
So my responsibility was to manage the staff that works with the students, but then also create the programming and how it's facilitated and all of that. So I had my son was born in 2003. So again, back then, in my mind, going after a dream and having a child didn't seem like they worked together.
Right.
I had to go get a real job. And so in my mind, if I got to go get a job, I'm going to get something that's aligned
with what you're doing.
with what I want to do down the road. And so working with Carver, it allowed me to be in charge of programming, work with young people, and then learn the business of youth development from inside out. I was just doing it because it's what I wanted to do and what I thought the world needed.
Right.
But I didn't understand the business of youth development.
Exactly.
And so community centers work different than YMCAs, work different than Boys and Girls Clubs. But those are pretty much the leading spaces for youth development.
Right.
So working in a community center is Schenectady, New York, which is like near Albany.
Yeah.
So I'm in that community, but I wasn't from the community.
Right.
But I realized the impact that I had with getting all these young people to actually want to come to the center, participate in programming. So we created basketball leagues. We gave them NBA jerseys.
Nice.
So they looked the part. I was always big on, if you want to be successful, look successful.
Right.
So dress successful. And we just kind of put that on the young people there. So we started like golf and all these different programs I introduced to that community.
Nice.
So I saw that I'm on the right path.
And later, I mean, you just pretty much continued to work in those spaces, like you said is you actually said something I had a question about. The community center is different from Boys and Girls Club, different from YMCAs.
Yes.
How?
Community centers a community center focuses on the entire community, young and old.
Gotcha.
They can be a food pantry. They can have community meetings there.
Gotcha.
And then they happen to do youth programming. With the Boys and Girls Club, they're specifically for young boys and girls.
Right.
And they offer programming, but it's a collective way of how they actually do it. And it's membership driven. You only pay, $30, $40. You have a membership for the year. And they pretty much target underserved kids for Boys and Girls Clubs. And then YMCAs is like a real nonprofit, but they actually, you have to pay a monthly membership and you have to pay for programming. And they service the entire community as well.
Gotcha.
But it just looks nicer than a community center.
Right.
Most of them. So I saw how the business operated in all three of them, and I saw the pros in all of them. And I just kind of pulled and injected that into 411.
Right.
Yeah.
Dope. Is that like what you envisioned to have like your own center or like?
Yeah, actually we're in conversation now. The next step is we started Saturday school.
Yes.
Which is we do something here at Patchwerk on Saturdays.
What is that?
It's a music academy where we bring 15 to 20 students all over the city. They register online, come together. They never met each other. They sit in a room and we bring music people to come speak with them.
Nice.
They learn writing, they learn producing, we bring lawyers. But the cool part, they get a chance to create their own EP,
Nice.
5-song EP. So there's producers,
In
writers.
like a series of
It's a
weekends?
8-week program.
Nice.
They come here for 2 hours, 8 weeks.
Nice.
And we tell them to have group chats so that they stay in communication throughout the week. So once they get here, they actually are doing the work.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
yeah, we've been doing that for 5 years here.
That's amazing.
So we're building Saturday school program. We started with music. We're going to add film and then bring our other sports in one building. So we have young people come to this one space, and you whatever it is that you want to do. If you want to, and you take 2 classes every Saturday. So if I want to do music and basketball, those are the only 2 focuses that I would have for that 8 weeks.
Gotcha.
On that Saturday school.
Gotcha.
And the people that teaches our program are people with skin in the game, pros. Like our dance instructor, her name is Kim Gibson. She is right next to Beyonce. She's Beyonce's dance captain.
Nice.
I have a history in playing basketball. Our lacrosse player coaches professionally.
Right.
So that's what separates us from other programs.
How do you have the time
to teach?
Yeah, you as well as all the other people who are like professional.
Right. Well,
you know what I mean?
This is a passion, and I always carve out time. And so I only teach one day a week over at Morningside, but it's something that I love to do.
But even like the other people who are like, you coach a professional team, or, obviously there's an off season, but not really when you're doing something like that, or you are the choreographer or the dance captain of Beyonce's team. That's, it doesn't sound like you have a lot of time.
Well, if you have a passion for it, she has a passion for dance, and everyone knows she's not going to dance for Beyonce forever.
Right.
And so her job is she loves to work with young people.
Gotcha.
So she's creating her own dance space.
Gotcha.
So, but in doing that, we just try to find and line up like-minded people.
Right.
That have a passion for young people and what they do.
So at some point you did actually start the nonprofit for the brand, for 411
Yes.
Brand and Foundation. How did you go about creating that nonprofit, and why did you feel like it was time to do the 401(c)(3)? You know what I mean? Like, you always hear about businesses, especially like celebrities or whatever, and they're like, oh, they started a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, your mission and your goals have been aligned since you were damn near 11. But I just wonder, like, why that was beneficial to 411 and, like, why you decided at whatever moment to do it.
We started the nonprofit in 2014, and I always was reluctant to do a nonprofit because I always thought it was just begging for money.
Right.
And I just saw this as a business, not just begging for money.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was did some research and found out like the YMCA is a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
And they operate like a business. Mm-hmm. So as a nonprofit, you have to pay to come into the Y. And if you want to do programs that the Y offered, you have to pay separately for that.
Right.
So I'm like, well, that's just like a business.
Right.
If you're coming in, you're offering a program and you got to pay for it. And it's just not giving away for free, because what happened in certain communities, well, in our community, our kids or parents wouldn't really pay for programming. They would pay for aesthetically, whether J's or they would rather spend their money that way to look good for the moment. Other communities will invest in their kids and pay $300-400 for a 9-week program to expose their children.
Right.
So now we're working on this side of the track, but not really on where it's really needed.
Right.
But how do we operate as a business if they're not going to pay for it?
Right.
So I had to be strategic and say, okay, if we were a nonprofit, maybe we can partner with companies that have want to help this community. Then it can be a win-win on both sides.
Absolutely.
So we formed a nonprofit, and the city of Atlanta is our partner.
Nice. And I wanted to ask you, like, how your program is different from any of the other programs or foundations that exist. What makes you all the, like, go-to? Why should kids or why should parents involve their kids in, the things you're doing here at Patchwerk, or the just things you're doing across the community for the 411 brand?
Well, what separates us, one, is our instructors. It's just not babysitting, or just a place for your kids to go until you get off work. Our programming is set up that if you specifically want to do well in music, this is where you want to come, because you're going to surround yourself with like-minded people that want to be good. Unfortunately, in after-school programming, your parents put you in it, and you might be next to 3 people that don't even want to be there. That energy will suck it out of you of wanting to be great because you're around that.
Right.
So we try to cut that off. We only invite people that really want to be a part of the program. So if you want to play basketball and we tell you got to do 15 sprints, you should just do 15 sprints.
Right.
Because as a coach, that's what I did to become where I was.
Right.
Where if you're in after school program, you tell someone to do 15 sprints and they don't feel like doing it, they won't do it.
Right.
Because they're not buying into what they came there for. They just are looking for an after school space.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's what separates us as our instructors.
Absolutely. So it seems like, and I said this already, you had a full circle moment, being that you, throughout your career, went from working in the Boys and Girls Club to having your own programs there, inside the very same Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah.
I think that's so ironic. Why do you think it was important for you to have that foundation working first with an organization like the Boys and Girls Club, or like the Y, or like the community center, before starting your own, before diving into doing your own programming and establishing even now your own center, to where you can do these programs?
Well, it was important. One, because in the beginning, I just thought I just had an idea. It wasn't a business.
Right.
And Boys and Girls Club, YMCAs, that's a business.
Right.
So, but I quickly realized what I was doing was no different than what they were doing. And it took me being inside to see actually what that was.
Right.
And then when I actually worked there, I'm like, this is no different than what I do
Right.
over here.
Right.
So I do see how they also align, but also working with the Boys and Girls Club, there was a ceiling. It's like a glass ceiling. There was a time when T.I. called and wanted to give away book bags. The Boys and Girls Club I ran was on the east side. He's from the west side. So he's never been on the east side to do any charitable anything.
Right.
So they called and said he wanted to give away book bags. I told him that would be a great idea. Called downtown and told them T.I. wants to come, wanted to give away book bags, this, that, and the other. They said he couldn't. And I was like, well, why? And they said, because we asked him to build a studio at on the south side, and he didn't want to do it. So we wouldn't let him come to the Boys and Girls Club because they looked at it as the celebrities were using the Boys and Girls Club to make their image look good. But that wasn't what the case was. I mean, it could be because
Right.
T.I. went through a lot of issues around that time.
Right.
But at the same time, why would you take that away from these young people?
Right. The opportunity to get something, if not this, you know what I mean?
And just to be around them. So that was the ceiling.
Yeah.
So I realized, okay, I couldn't, even in the position that I'm in,
I still can't make that decision.
I can't. So I need to pivot. And so that's when how do I pivot? And I took, some weeks to figure out what that was. And that was starting the 501c3 and resigning and just jumping full feet into this.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think all the things that you're doing is amazing for the 401 Brand Foundation. What's next for you? I mean, like I started with the conversation, you've been doing this for 25 plus years, and you've remained focused on this goal, which I think is amazing,
Thank you.
consistent. What's next? What do you, aside from what you already told me about the center, which I think is amazing, but what plans do you have for the foundation, and like how to continue to grow this mission, this effort?
Well, the goal now, we're working on a 10-year plan.
Oh, wow.
We figured out who we are, why we do what we do, what it looks like here in Atlanta. So Atlanta is the blueprint.
Right.
Starting next year is when we'll go to other markets. We'll take everything that we do in Atlanta, bottle it up, and go to another city.
Nice.
And do the same exact thing. So the goal in 10 years is to have 411 in 10 U.S. markets as well as overseas.
Nice.
So, and just doing exactly what we're doing, because we find out we did a music academy in L.A. During All-Star Weekend last year. Same thing we did here, and it was a hit.
Wow.
So everything that we do here, we can do in other markets.
Yeah.
So that's the next goal, and then create a space where those other markets can come to Atlanta and all kids from all walks of life can participate in programming. to actually build those bridges, and we'll bring other people to kind of share their stories as well.
That's awesome, John. I'm very proud of you and
I
very happy
appreciate
for
it.
the 411 brand and foundation. I pray for all of those things to manifest as they will and they
Yes.
should, because you've been putting in the groundwork.
Thank you.
For years. So we thank you. Can you tell them where they can find you on social media, where you can find the brand on social media as well?
Social media, everything is at the 411 brand. And for me, it's at John Thomas 411 on Instagram.
Sweet. And where did 411 come from?
411 means information.
Okay, so the information.
When Mary J. Blige's album came out in 92, What's the 411? That's where the idea came. And then 411 is you come to it for information.
Gotcha.
So that's the genesis of the program.
Dope.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much, John, once again for sitting down with us here on the I Do Music Podcast. And as always, you guys can find this podcast at IDM Podcast on all social media, as well as myself at Sammy Approved. And thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Sonically superior.